Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Yesterday's announcement and roster reveal for the Ogre mercenaries made me think about what is currently missing for the potential Ogre Kingdoms race pack in the future. Not only that, but seeing as the same article had a hint about a missing unit, I figured now would be the best time to talk about what's actually missing and how they would more or less perform on the battlefield. We'll start off with the previously mentioned hint. As you can see on screen right now, this is the artwork that was showcased for the Ogre Balls. We're getting two variants for the standard Ogre mercenaries, but there is one more, and as you can see on the artwork, it is the Iron Fist. The Ogre Iron Fist itself is very much like a shield. It still acted as a hand weapon, but when it came to the tabletop, this is what gave them the shield option to be able to perform a parry save. So Ogres with an Iron Fist would act in an almost identical way as standard Ogres with one hand weapon, though I'm assuming that they'll be given a bit of extra armor and the shielded trait. Next up we have the Ogre Iron Guts. I had a few questions regarding as to why the Ogres don't seem to have great weapons, and this is precisely the reason why. Iron Guts are a more elite version of standard Ogre Balls, wearing heavy armor and normally having great weapons. They didn't really have any other weapon options on the tabletop. There could be in the future, but I very much doubt it due to the changes with regards to the man-eaters. Iron Guts on the tabletop were always geared out to do heavy damage, and it is expected that in Total War Warhammer, they'll have a mid to low tier role. And yes, I completely understand as to why people might say, wait, why are these mid to low tier, as they are ogres, but believe me, there are far stronger ogres. Lead Belchers are the most common form of range unit for the Ogre Kingdoms. Think about handgunners for the Imperials, but instead of handguns, they're using cannons, most commonly fitting a number of different types of armaments or scrap metal inside said cannons to be able to fire as a type of shotgun in a sense. They likely won't be the most accurate of units considering, well yeah, it's a shotgun, however, they will likely do a lot of damage if they manage to land a hit, and obviously a scatterfire will make them at least land a few hits. Now, we already have two different types of man-eaters, that with pistols and the others with great weapons. There were in fact many different types of man-eaters when it came to the Ogre Kingdoms, as they formed more of a specialized hero squad. I'm assuming that in Total War Warhammer, we might see another variant come into effect, that with additional hand weapons, just to add in another high-tier blender type of unit. As it's very likely that the man-eaters themselves will play more of a tier 3 type of unit when it comes to the ogres. We'll of course have to wait until the future where we get more information, but it more or less kind of looks like that. Lastly, in terms of infantry, we have Noblars, which would pretty much be the only standard infantry as they are the only more or less goblin-sized unit. Noblars themselves would likely be the tier 0 unit of the Ogre Kingdoms, where you could recruit them just from your basic settlement if they end up having settlements. Obviously not requiring any buildings to actually recruit Noblars, because who would waste a building slot on that? Stat-wise on the tabletop, they were very similar to that of Skaven Slaves, so yeah, pretty much a tar pit. Now, in the tabletop there were two versions. There were the standard Noblars with hand weapons, and then there were the Trappers which had a short-range weapon, nothing too fancy. I'm assuming that they might also add in a Noblar unit with spears too, because, well, it will just kind of be nice to have some early anti-large. While they might not be the most exciting units, they are ones that can scale walls and so on, so it's pretty much the only purpose they serve other than the basic tar pit. And yes, even ogres will make use of tar pits. Hold the enemy down with some Noblars, and then charge through the flank and the rear with, say, Mournfang Cavalry, because I know many of you are looking forward to playing with Mournfang. Next, we'll move on to some cavalry options, as there are still a few that we haven't seen yet. Well, technically these are all monstrous cavalry, but let's move on. So, we've already got the standard type of Mournfang Cavalry, but we are missing a version with, say for example, the Ogre Pistols. Admittedly, that was only for the Ogre Champions from the Mournfang units, but it could make for an interesting unit. though there was a missing unit that was from the tabletop as Mournfang Cavalry with great weapons. If I personally had to pick, I would go with that of the pistol unit to give some skirmishing type of fire weapons. While they of course were unit champions, we do know that Creative Assembly like to use unit champions to make a completely new unit, so this might actually work fairly well. Rhinox Riders could be very much possible, a much heavier form of cavalry, slower but very heavy hitting because, well, it's a rhino, isn't it? I'd see it changed around a little bit though, as normally it was just standard ogre bulls that would ride upon them, I believe, so it could be interesting to have them switched out with, say, Iron Guts, so that way you have heavily armored troops mounted on a slowish but hard-punching type of unit. Of course, then we'd have to move on to the bigger monstrous cavalry, as they do get even bigger. First up, of course, we do have the Stonehorn, fast and, well, pretty much a line breaker. This monster was pretty much used to smash into enemy lines, incredibly high armor, but also very fast. Stonehorns were attributed to that of a tank in a sense. Just put it in there in the middle, and watch as the enemy fails to do too much damage to it, as it just smashes around and thrashes about. It's likely that this unit will also feature a hunter on top to be able to have some form of range damage too. Think of this in a similar way to like the Norscan mammoths. The Thunder Tusk might look very similar, but it's actually very, very different. It's slower, and yes, it can do a lot of damage in melee combat, but what the Thunder Tusk did is it was able to have some special abilities, being able to debuff enemies, making them fight slower, and of course also having a rather potent type of ranged attack too. It was very similar to that of a magic missile too, so there's a lot of really cool things about this monster which will make it more like a moving type of altar. The fact that it's also completely huge means that it will take a decent amount of damage before it dies, so you would be more than able to have it in the front line debuffing enemies whilst also causing massive amounts of damage. The difference is, of course, the Thunder Tusk and the Stonehorn. Like I said, both of them might be similar but are drastically different. Now let's start moving on to monsters, and first we'll start off with the giant. Yes, I know, everyone is tired of seeing giants everywhere, and it's not just because Creative Assembly seem to like implementing giants, it's just that they featured in a lot of army books. Gorgas are an interesting unit. They are actually ogres, but were born with several birth defects, so they were thrown away and then later recruited in this very feral form. On the tabletop, they were actually pretty good. Unbreakable, ambushers, and having frenzy, they were very similar to that of Chaos Spawn, but also just very, very potent, very quick, and decent to do damage. Gorgas in Warhammer 3 could be very interesting. Being unbreakable and relatively fast will be good, but considering that they were also ambushers, it's likely they could have Vanguard too. These could be your hidden units, which is obviously interesting considering that they're still ogres, so they're still very big, but it will obviously be quite useful for the ogres as most of their force is big, so being able to have stuff that can hide for a bit will be quite useful. The next unit would be the Yeti, which are incredibly fast and admittedly might seem very similar to that of the Gorgas, but the difference is they more follow the line of the Thunder Tusk. On the tabletop, they would debuff enemy weapon skill, so it could be possible that they'll have something like that with reducing melee damage to anything near them within a certain area, or a frost debuff which will affect any enemies that get hit by the Yetis, which will then mean that you will be able to have a smaller unit that can move around and, depending on how sieges change in the future, maybe climb on walls? It would just be really nice if we could have monstrous infantry and some small monster units being able to climb on walls, but we'll have to wait and see. Saber Tusks would also be a cool unit, incredibly fast-moving giant battle cats, and since we're already getting some saber cats for the Kizovites, it's not out of the question to be able to have them for the Ogre Kingdoms too. They're basically war machine hunters, but much more powerful than, say, warhounds or any type of wolf unit. These are monsters that you'll be able to have to attack war machines, but you wouldn't have a problem sending them to attack enemy lines. Obviously, they would not be so great versus spears, but other than that, they should be incredibly versatile. I don't know if they're going to be added in as their own units or you'll require an Ogre Hunter, but the general thing is these types of units are generally split in Warhammer, at least for Total War. We've spoken about Rhinox Riders, so why not just generic Rhinoxes too? Because it would be rather interesting, and the fact of the matter is we're going to talk about Rhinoxes again very soon. Again, the Rhinox is pretty much, what, a woolly rhino? It'd just be really cool to have it as a standard monster unit too, as, you know, it would just be interesting to have something else. Plus, creative assembly like reusing assets, this is very true, so if you've already got the riders, and then for the other two units that we'll discuss in a little bit, why not also have it as a standard monster? And finally, artillery. Yep, the Ogres also have artillery. First up, we have the Iron Blaster, a absolutely massive cannon being pulled by a Rhinox, hence why I said a standard monster variant Rhinox would work quite well. Now, the cannon itself is known to be one of the most powerful and sophisticated pieces of weaponry known in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Able to shatter walls without too much of a problem, and, well, it just looks absolutely cool, doesn't it? Sometimes cool factor is the most important thing. Ogre artillery is very different to standard artillery, where yes, the artillery piece itself is very strong, but the fact that it's being pulled by a Rhinox means that it can get into close combat and not have to worry too much. This means that the Iron Blaster itself is highly durable. And the last unit would be the Scrap Launcher, again being pulled by a Rhinox. The only difference this time is that the Iron Blaster is manned by Ogres, and the Scrap Launcher is manned by Noblars. Now obviously the weapon is very different too, acting more as a scattershot catapult, which is good for anti-hordes, but that's pretty much it. Though, again, you've got access to a Rhinox, so you might as well throw it into the front line too. All I'm thinking is that these might be the most versatile and powerful types of artillery pieces in the whole Warhammer series, but we're going to have to wait and see how they get imagined by creative assembly. These are pretty much all the units that are missing for the Ogre Kingdoms, and actually the majority of these are from the 8th edition army book. Just the Rhinox by itself and the Rhinox Rider aren't. The Rhinox Rider was from a supplement. But there's not really that many units missing, which means that they could be a very strong contender for the pre-order incentive race. We still don't know 100% just yet, or even a race pack. And the race packs normally now have a mostly complete army, so all of these aren't really out of the question. But let me know what you think about these units in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Ogre for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.